Hello, friends. This week we're going to talk about how the first whole year unfolded after that experience that I had. It was a crazy year, there was a lot going on, and I'm probably going to break this up into several segments because there were distinct chapters in terms of people and places and things that occurred. As a reminder, after I had my spiritual awakening experience the week before Christmas, all my preferences and aspects of my identity had been quote unquote reset, as I mentioned. And so this led to a process of relearning the totality of who I was. And that was an experience that was at times treacherous and scary, and at times often deeply joyful. And many times it was just an adventure. It was and is in many ways now still just an adventure to receive things that had been received my whole life and perceived my whole life in a certain way through a certain lens with a certain film, if you will, over the way I could see things. And then suddenly to have been surrounded by all these elements that were always there, but to get to experience them in a completely, totally new and joyful way has been a complete blessing. It keeps life endlessly creative and beautifully, wonderfully, forever unfolding, opening. But as I mentioned in the very beginning, and I would call the very beginning the first 6 months, in particular the first 3 months, so January, February, March, incredibly disorienting and definitely more of waves of stability in terms of a new constancy of these experiences, and then also going into the troughs of having some desire to unsee or unknow, to go back to the previous state of being that I had been living my life in. Not because I wanted that, but because I couldn't figure out a bottom to this this new experience. When I say bottom, it's not bottom's probably not the right word. It's more I couldn't find the edges of the experience. If you'll remember, it all happened instantaneously. There was no unfolding in terms of relearning. The relearning was always an unfolding, isn't unfolding now, but the resetting of my preferences and the resetting of calibrating my heart, my time, my energy, my focus, all of that was instantaneous. And so if there was any grasping to go back, it was simply because I kept finding layers and aspects of myself that I realized I didn't know anymore. I had to re-meet and have to re-greet those parts of myself to bring them into full unification. And as I've mentioned, I feel like the way that I get to experience life now, the biggest aspect to it is that singular unification. So everything that I'm saying and doing and feeling and thinking is not just perceived as a oneness, as something greater than myself, but it is lived as experientially an energetic oneness, in that there is no reflections. There are no reflections to different groups of people in different settings for different purposes. So previously there was a lot of energy, more than I could have known, to my social cues and behaviors and my business and my intimate, my personal life. The categories could go on, but there would be slight nuances, not different people, but nuances that I would perceive potentially as subtle, but I didn't realize the energy and the effect that division, that's what it is. It's a division of a singular existence and energy and being. I didn't realize that division, what a absolute distraction and energy drain it was on the totality of my existence. So with that unification, there was a lot of energy and time and the eradication of nonsense in terms of trying to be things other than just existing. So therefore, meditation not only was more clear, but the energy was higher, not because there was a secret technique or a tactic. It was the simplification of being unified as a single experience of life, that you might imagine a channel and, like a set of roots, or if you have like water branching out in many directions. If it's singular, it's like a powerful river. It's clear and clean and moving quickly and also effortlessly in one direction, with all these tributaries, which could be all the layers of identity and obligation and responsibility that may not be aligned. All those tributaries then open up, and it's no longer singular, nor is it completely aligned or directed or even rapidly moving. It's kind of the slow sucking of the river into smaller and smaller fragmentations. And so with that unification, I found great freedom, and also at different times grasping to previous identities I would have known as I kept trying to find the edges of this new existence that was whole. So it's not something that happened and it was an instantaneous, pervasive feeling of joy. It was not knowing what I didn't know. So I couldn't quite find the edges as to what this experience was. And so everything happened so quickly that any grasping would have had to the previous would have been for that reason alone, and also not having to redefine myself in the context of other people, other situations. I find that for many of us, it's our own experience is of great joy, as I mentioned, and peace and understanding and singular focus. But there's all these other pieces and cues and mirrors that we've set up for ourselves and other people and other parts of our life, and all of these environments that we created as part of the response to our identity. Our identity that we create through our ego is not only just what we create for ourselves, but that set of images and that set of personalities and then has a ripple effect on all the environment around us. And so as we are creating through our mind and our ego these different faces, also the world around is recalibrating to that image and that story that we're creating. So if in the center of all of that, the essence of your being unifies, becomes clear, becomes one, it doesn't do anything to change everything around you that you've already created reputationally in terms of stories, etc. There is an energetic pull without having to use words and without having to, quote unquote, update people through normal means. There is an energetic clearing and cleaning that does change everything around you. And also there is an adaptive learning process. People know the relationship with you and to you based on the stories that you have presented as yourself, as your image. And so after an experience like this, although there may be great clarity and peace inside, there's still the work to be done then to work with your environment. Oftentimes that work initially is too much for a person to take on as they're going through these changes. And oftentimes if someone goes on a pilgrimage or, goes on a long journey, that's primarily reason why is they need to get out of these social cues and out of the constructs that they intentionally or unintentionally created so that as this new being is freeing itself and just coming into its full existence, it has room and space and time to breathe, literally to be unfettered by the previous set of stories that were in relationship to it. I found that to be true for myself. And so, as I knew that I couldn't work in the same way that I had been previously, which was primarily using words and stories to influence people in a certain direction of decision making, when I realized that that was no longer in alignment with this new clarity, then there's a fear, right? I've mentioned this before. There's a fear of like, okay, well, what will replace that? I still live in this world and I need to provide for myself to some extent. What will that be? And there's one sort of survival based animalistic response of, again, grasping, feeling like you've got to do these things to change things to get them to line up, that is fear based. And out of that fear, your reactions are then, clearing only what you can see immediately, only what you can know immediately, within the realm of your senses, within the realm of your historical experience. And if you're not going to operate that way, then there is a deeper trust in the universe itself, beyond your immediate environment, beyond your animalistic responses, beyond your historical stories that you've experienced yet through your life. And to build that trust and to surrender to that greater purpose and that greater way to live a life, it takes time, because it's a relationship, and all relationships that are based on trust, whether it's a father and a son or your best friend or your relationship with the universe, they are in fact all the same, and those are based on time. And so to afford oneself time to trust the universe, a new environment can sometimes be very important. And if you still have all of your previous social cues and the reflections of the roles you created surrounding you at all times, to get established in this new way of being can be very difficult within that environment. So I knew very quickly experientially that that was not going to be something that would be healthy for me, that I could not easily do all of the work to know who I was and simultaneously re-educate people on who I am, because I couldn't even articulate it externally. It was an internal process that was happening. And in many places all around the world, of course, India, but even many places in Europe with monasteries and other traditions like that, when someone was going to go through a deep inward experience, historically in parts of the world, there's been places for them to find refuge. There's hermitages, there's hermitage experiences, and there are, again, pilgrimages. And all of these types of times where people can go simply to spiritually deepen and evolve and go inward. Many of those no longer exist. And it's just an interesting facet of this time. Every time is different and it has different challenges. And I would say in my time and my age growing up and the place that I've grown up, to communicate to society that you need a period just to go inward for the sake of your own spiritual identity and development, very, very difficult to find. Possibly if you work at a company for a decade or 2 decades, and they will give you a quote unquote sabbatical so that you can take time off, which might be 6 months or a year. But those are very rare. And, the chance of you timing what's happening with you energetically, spiritually, karmically, in line with the time that your line of work decides to give you an extended period of time off, it's not statistically likely that those factors would line up perfectly. So, as I mentioned, it was just a confluence of events where I was shutting down a startup that I had been working on for 7 years at that point, and we had stuff in India and Europe and the US. So I had the blessing of us having just one client left on the payroll who had a technology license with us. It was just enough for me to live on, no more, just the basics. But it afforded me, in the period of time closing down the company, the freedom to be anywhere and not, I wasn't pitching anyone, I wasn't in any group meetings, I wasn't hiring and firing. It allowed me to step outside of those traditional things I had been doing, to just to be and just to learn and experience what life had to offer. So I consider that grace, that timing of those events coalesced and came together. So the very first thing that happened was my brother had recently had a divorce, and he was open to me coming to spend time with him, to support him. And he lived in San Diego. And San Diego is very close to a place called Encinitas. And Encinitas is on the coast of California. And it was the first place that Yogananda, while he was in the US, really set up his primary ashram and base of living. He was the first one to bring yoga over in a significant way at mass scale from India. So Yogananda wrote a very famous book called Autobiography of a Yogi, which is always a beautiful one for those of you who are just new on the spiritual path, that kind of get a sense of what's possible. So I was there supporting my brother, which, based on this new existence, was a really meaningful time to get to spend together. And I just shared the truth with him. And my brother's actually quite a spiritual person. He's spiritually curious, and we never really had the chance to have those conversations before that time. So it was so nice to be able to fill my heart and my soul, be with him in a different way that is rather indescribable. But we were doing a number of things together, and I could feel that this essence of my new being was healing for him as well as for me, and just us together. So multi layers to the healing that was going on there. And I had gotten involved with a group called the Oneness Blessing in Atlanta. And I mentioned that in another one of these, where it was the first time. It's an energetic exchange where it's all backgrounds, all practices, all religions, but you end up saying mantras in a certain way and feel this incredibly palpable love in your heart. And then once you can get into that energy in that space, you take your hands and you place them in a certain way on other people's heads to receive and give this energy. And it's not coming from you. You are the hollow reed, if you will. You are the conduit. So it's nothing related to you or your ego or, receive my love. It's the opposite of all of that. And they have groups all over the world. So for the first time ever, I was able to travel different places. And even though I wouldn't know any of these people before I walk into a room, primarily in just meditations and silence and then saying some mantras, there's this universal energy and love that is, from my perspective and experience, not even related to the mantras and the group. It's just, if you set intention and you connect to your heart in the presence of other beings in a pure way, the love that you can use within your field to give and receive is incredibly tangible. It's not an idea. It's powerfully palpable. And so I found some groups of the Oneness Blessing there and met some amazing people. One man, Eric, who leads some groups out there, had been with Maharishi Mahesh, who was a famous meditation teacher with leading the TM movement. And I got to hear amazing stories from him. He spent most of his life with him and shared some beautiful insights. But I was getting to meet great people and spending a lot of time in Encinitas. there's some beautiful meditation gardens there. So I would get to spend on the ocean. That's where Yogananda would go and meditate with people when he was there at his hermitage. So I was spending time with my brother, and I was still very much figuring out who I was. I would go to Encinitas. I would, be meeting with different spiritual groups and be meditating in the meditation gardens, coming home, spending time with my brother. It was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful time. I was also intensively doing sun gazing at that time, which is still a practice that I love deeply. And I'll do a separate podcast on it, but it's allowing the sun to pass directly through your body and into the ground as a purification. And so you can eventually work your way up to 40 minutes of sun gazing, where you allow the sun to pass directly through your eyes, into your pineal gland, and through your body and back down through the ground. I was doing a lot of sun gazing at the time. And I was also just having tremendous synchronicities. Again, the stories are kind of endless about just being in places at times, and people would come up to me and have a conversation, or I would start a conversation with them. And there's so many alignments. So it was the first time outside of my environment where I was already living that I was getting to be truly in the flow. I didn't have a series of meetings or obligations really for the most part at that time. And I was getting to be deeply heart connected with my brother. And at the same time, I was getting to be part of these people and communities around Encinitas. And I would just go take the bus and the train and rent bikes. And it was a huge adventure. Really good times. Lots of lessons. So I did that for just over a month, and was more deeply oriented into that oneness blessing community out there. And after that, I came back to Atlanta for a bit of time, sorted out some things, and I knew that I wanted to travel to India. But I also knew that I wanted to travel completely intuitively. And so the way that unfolds for me is that I do research places, but I try not to make any ironclad reservations anywhere, because like most things, if you're going to truly create an environment for unfolding, then you need to allow the universe to unfold. I say you can't trust the universe unless you give it an opportunity to trust it. And it's similar with things unfolding. Things only unfold if you are participating in creating the environment through which they can unfold. If you cannot create an environment that unfolding can occur, then you cannot experience unfolding. You're only experiencing things that you're controlling. That's a whole nother podcast. But in reference to India, I did have to go for a legitimate reason to sign some documents to close down our Indian business. But that was going to take me, a day. And I went ahead and booked in, just over a month of time. And I went to the Oneness Temple, which is where this Oneness group, started their practice. And a big part of the spiritual journey is authenticity too. So, I went there, and many people have many stories that, it's on the ley lines and the energy grid of the earth, and the energy is so palpable and so intense. And I didn't feel it. I went there and I didn't feel it. And one of the things that you have to do is you have to be authentic, and you have to be truthful with what you do and don't experience. There's an infinite number of doors that will all take you to the same oneness, the same truth of life. But not all those doors will open for you in the same way. So it's very important that you follow your own heart. And as you explore things, if it's not resonating in the same way that it might for others, then at that time, in that way, in that place, it's not for you. And to force that, or to not clearly communicate the truth of your experience, would be a shame, because really spirituality, again, it's not about believing anything. It's only your direct experience, and your direct experience is perfect for you, but you have to honor it, and you have to be truthful about what that means. So I went there, and beautiful experiences, but I didn't feel I didn't feel the hype of what people had talked about. Um, so I then set off to northern India and went to go see where the Dalai Lama lives. And he was in residence. That was the first time I had seen him in person. And you could go every morning very early as he would walk through the courtyard and just sort of be in his presence, as he would walk from his residence, which is in the back, to the main hall where they would have all sorts of retreats and meetings and things. So I got there and got up early, and every morning for 3 mornings, I could sort of be in close proximity. And that was a feeling, that was an energy field, that was a direct experience. And I'll come to Ram Dass later, but I will tell you, in the presence of Ram Dass and the Dalai Lama, 100% the same somatic wisdom of what they call the Bhav, BHAV, this field of love that centers around these beings who have, very fully opened up their hearts to the flow of love. And on the very last day, for the people who are closest to him that he's invited into his home, etc., he will offer them one white piece of cloth that is blessed, and there is a specific word for it, which I can't remember at this time. I don't want to say the wrong thing, but it's a tradition. And so he'd offer those to people who were his personal visitors, into his home, etc. And every day I'm just going out there and doing my practice, and I'm just primarily being in that energy field, just to be around him and in that environment was a true blessing and gift. So I would just sort of stand there silently with an open heart and just feel the bhav, just receive that. And on the last day I left, and then I had walked out of the temple maybe 5 minutes. I was walking down the street and I see this German man. He says, "Oh, excuse me." He taps me on the shoulder, and I noticed that he's one of the ones that had been in that close group that morning. And he said, I saw you there in the temple. I was like, "Oh yeah." He said, "You were in such a loving state. Your heart was so open. I could tell how important it was for you to be there." I said, "Oh, thank you." He said, "Honestly, I'm with this group, but I don't feel that. I don't have that experience with the Dalai Lama. So could I offer my white cloth to you?" And I was very touched by that, very unexpected. I wasn't in my mind aware of any certain way I was or wasn't acting, nor did I think that anybody was paying attention in that sense. So the point in telling you that was, to me that cloth is very special, but it was simply because I was just being naturally present with an open heart, and I could feel the love I was getting from the Dalai Lama, and I was just allowing that to flow through me, and he could perceive that through me from him. And so all of us, can be receiving this and giving it. And it's not that we're receiving it from these beings, it's not from the Dalai Lama. It's universal love that's within all of us. And when they do certain practices and they have certain traditions to dedicate time and spaciousness to fully embodying that love, then we can feel it more in ourself as ourself. And then we know what's possible. We feel that opening. We feel that deeper sea of love. And once you know it's possible experientially, of course you're going to spend time in your life to make that the essence of your pervasive being. How could you not? Why would you not? So I had some beautiful experiences there. I went to Rishikesh, which is a place where many spiritual seekers go in northern India. And there's a very large Hanuman statue, Murti, there along the Ganga River. And I didn't know at the time that Neem Karoli Baba had had a hand in its creation. And so what I would do is I would get up in the mornings and I would go meditate along the river just by myself, because again, I I just wanted the day to unfold. I wanted people and places and things to be in line with my experience. And so I remember one of those first mornings getting to Rishikesh. I was just by myself, meditating by the river for a period of time. And I just got this sense someone was there looking at me. And I opened my eyes, and there's this pretty much a kid, I would guess he was probably 13, 14, 15. And he's just sitting there staring at me. He's maybe 10 feet away. I'm kind of like, oh. And he's like, I don't know what he said exactly, but it was basically like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I was just meditating. And he says, let me take you to my grandfather. And I'm kind of like, oh. I'm like, your grandfather? He's like, well, my grandfather oversees the Hanuman temple here, and you should come. And so it was a beautiful experience. He took me to see his grandfather, and they tell me the history of this Hanuman, and he gives me prasad. And prasad is something that's blessed, is sanctified, and then you receive it as a sacred gift from God. And so he gave me some of that prasad, and it was only later that I found out that Neem Karoli Baba, who is really the center of my life now, had been responsible for that whole experience. But those are how my days would unfold, and so I would meet him, and then he would show me things. He'd introduce me to other people. I go to other temples. It's just in the flow every day. My very first morning in Rishikesh, I got in late at night, like 1 a.m. It's just the way it worked out from where I was flying from, where the Dalai Lama had been. And so I'm so excited. I'm still every morning waking up at 4:30, 5 o'clock, doing my meditation, everything. And there's an ashram that does an early morning program, Sivananda Ashram. Sivananda was a very famous saint who lived in Rishikesh, and he has a very famous ashram there. So I woke up early that morning, and I don't know where I am. I'm kind of disoriented, and all these places are confusing, sights and sounds, and I'm by myself. And so I type in on Google Maps like the navigation to get to this ashram, and I get up at 4:30. I think this program started at 5 o'clock. It was going to be like meditation, and I can't even remember, but something I felt like was important. So I type in Google Maps navigation. It's like a 15-20 minute walk, and I'm going through these streets, and it's dark, and again, I don't know this city. I only got in the night before, and there's just vibes, like I'm like, is this safe? There's stray dogs walking around, and just all the things that are common for India that takes a long time to get used to. And the road split, and I thought I was supposed to go left. Instead, I went right. So Google Maps is not so great in Rishikesh. So this road splits, and the gate and the door is down here, and I went up around this way. So I can see, eventually, I've walked up maybe like 10 minutes now this way. I can see the ashram down there, but there's all these gates and barbed wire and stuff. And the entrance now for me to go back would have been 10 minutes plus like another 5. And now it's pretty much 5 a.m. This program's going to start. So I'm on the backside of these gates. It's my very first morning in Rishikesh, which is a big deal. And so I say, everything's perfect. I am going to just climb over this gate. And the gate's there still, even if it's an ashram. Again, there's barbed wire and there's guards, So in the dark, I climb over this fence and like try to climb over the barbed wire, and I kind of get caught up on it. I fall on the other side of the ashram gate, and I cut my leg on the barbed wire. And so I'm laying on the ground, and then I realize that I created a big commotion, and I'm like panicked. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, are there guards here? You've cut your leg. So I just lay there. I don't move. And I'm like, okay, no one's here. No one hurt you. It's fine. Everything's fine. Your leg will be fine. So I get up and I hear this sound of people singing and praying. And I said, okay, that must be, yeah, I was going to go to a yoga class, like an asana class, different poses. And I hear this noise and singing and like very loud, vibrant things. And I go into this room and I see maybe 30, 40 people like dancing and singing very loud. Again, this is 5 a.m. All sorts of incense and offerings. I mean, just very elaborate. And I don't know what's going on. I have no idea if I'm supposed to be there. Am I allowed to be there? I'm kind of like walking in and people are looking and I'm kind of like acting like, just act like you should be here, see what happens. And there's only one woman who was Caucasian. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to follow her everywhere she goes. And so I jumped in line behind her because people are walking like a procession in a circle and they're going around and they're making different offerings and doing different things. I kind of like jump in line behind her and then whatever she would do, I would do. And I think she caught on really quickly that I was doing that, that I probably wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't know what I was at. And I think she got a pretty good sense that I was just copying everything she was doing. She didn't seem terribly pleased by it. So I kept trying to feel my way through this experience. And then eventually they start singing louder and louder. It gets crazier and crazier. I'm kind of like caught up in this group. And they go out on the streets of Rishikesh. I still don't know what it was or what they were doing. But that very first morning before the sun broke, they're going up and down every street and they're making all sorts of offerings and doing the arti with the light and flowers and incense and saffron. And so we go all over the city in this procession that I'm now part of. People are receiving us. And that was my very first morning. So days were like that, like days were just unfolding and very little structure, very just going with the flow. So I never went to Neem Karoli Baba's ashram for the reason that I mentioned before. I would try to kind of start direct myself in that direction, and it was like, no, this is not the time or the trip. Every time I started to use my mind and my ego to fulfill that desire, it would quickly be met with resistance. And so I had to be authentic that was just my own personal story of desire. That's not what was unfolding. I had to be authentic and truthful about my experience. So lots of stories, lots of beings, lots of teachers, lots of classes, lots of temples and ashrams. And I did that for, again, about a month. And just being by myself, in those environments, it was a wonderful learning experience for sure. Of course, I got sick, very sick for about 4 or 5 days. That's part of it. I was initiated very, 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 very sick. But I would say that for me, the learning was that, everything is sacred. I was able to have incredibly deep experiences in Atlanta and beautiful experiences in Encinitas and wonderful experiences in India, but none of them were more powerful than the others. None of them were about overshadowing or about chasing something greater than the next one. It's like the deeper I would surrender into the miracle of everything, these experiences are accessible everywhere through all sorts of people and teachings and experiences, but you just have to have this deep listening and opening and surrender to receive the magic that's like around you everywhere all the time. Lastly, I then went after that time to travel with my husband to go see his family in Zambia. And at that point in time is when the whole Ram Dass story opened up. I'm going to save the Ram Dass story for the next podcast because it's a whole saga and I want to just dedicate some time to that. But really the purpose of this one is just to talk about really like the purpose of pilgrimage, of creating time to allow yourself as you unfold these deeper experiences. If you don't honor them, if you don't allow yourself to take time for them to fully embody themselves, then you can't embrace all of the facets and layers of this new being that you have. And so regardless if you do this in retreat in your own backyard or if you go to India, Irrelevant. Irrelevant if you're doing practices and you surround yourself with an open surrender. And that was really my lesson, was all of it was beautiful. All of it was perfect as I surrendered to it, but none of it was more perfect or more beautiful than any other person or any other place that I experienced. So with that in mind, I just bless your journey and your unfolding, and ask that as you experience these new states, subtle or not so subtle, just give yourself the time and the space to fully embody them and to learn from your environment and from all the upagurus, all your teachers that you can meet on a daily basis in the most common places or the most austere, however it unfolds for you. Thank you very much.